Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I assess water damage for a living. Drainage systems, seepage problems, erosion risk. I go to places that are falling apart in slow motion, and I figure out why the water is going where it shouldn't be going. It is not glamorous work, and I have never pretended it is. I carry a moisture meter and a set of ground probes and a laptop full of spreadsheets, and I bill by the day. That is the whole of it. I tell you this because the nature of what I do means I end up in places most people only see in photographs. Not because I am special or lucky or adventurous, because the places in the photographs are also, underneath the photographs, real structures with real drainage problems, and someone has to go look at those. I have been to a castle in Scotland that smelled like wet dog and old electricity. I have been to a mission in the Arizona desert where the floor was slowly being eaten from underneath by a water table that had shifted since the building was put up. I have been to a lot of places, and all of them, underneath whatever they were supposed to be, were just buildings with problems. I tell myself that now. It helps a little. Not as much as I would like. The contract came through my firm in August. Machu Picchu had documented drainage issues along the eastern terrace system, chronic seepage affecting the structural integrity of retaining walls that were already 500 years old. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture had engaged a preservation partnership that had engaged my firm, and my firm had sent me because I was available and I had worked on comparable stonework sites before. I flew into Cusco and spent 2 days adjusting to the altitude before taking the train to Aguas Calientes, the small town at the base of the mountain where I would be staying. The town exists primarily to service tourists and has the particular atmosphere of a place that is always slightly crowded and always slightly damp. My room at the guest house was clean and small, and the window faced a concrete wall. I was fine with all of this. I took the bus up the mountain on a Wednesday morning in late September, off-season. The tourist numbers were lower, but not zero. There were still groups moving through the main terraces with guides, still cameras going up everywhere. I checked in with the site management office and met my contact, a preservation coordinator named Rodrigo. Rodrigo was in his mid-50s, built like someone who had spent most of his life walking up and down a mountain, which he had. He had a grey moustache and the particular manner of a man who is competent at his job and has run out of patience for people who are not competent at theirs. He looked me over when we shook hands, the way you look at a tool you're not sure is the right size for the job. Then he nodded once and took me to see the drainage channels. I liked him immediately. He didn't try to talk the whole time. The sight in the off-season, in the cold and the low cloud, was something different from the photographs. Not lesser, just different. The clouds came down so far some mornings that the peaks disappeared entirely, and you were left with just the terraces dropping away below you, and the wet grass and the sound of wind moving through old stone. It was a job site, I told myself. 4 days of ground probe work and a drainage assessment and a report. That was all this was. I believed that for 3 days. On the third day, I was working along a section of the eastern drainage system that ran beneath one of the agricultural terraces on the far side of the site, not a high-traffic area. The tour groups didn't come out this far. The grass was longer, and the stonework along the channel edges was in rougher shape than the areas closer to the main complex. I was following the channel with my ground probe, mapping the void space beneath the terrace floor, when the readings stopped making sense. The probe measures resistance. It tells you what's down there, whether it's solid fill or compacted earth or empty space. I had been getting consistent readings all morning, and then, in a section of maybe 4 meters along the channel, the readings opened up into something much larger, a void, not a small pocket in the fill, not a collapsed drainage chamber the size of a cabinet. Something with real depth to it, real lateral extension, something the size of a room. I ran the probe over the same section 3 times. The readings were consistent. I found Rodrigo eating lunch near the main complex and showed him the numbers on my screen. He looked at them with the same expression he'd had when he'd first looked at me, assessing. Then he was quiet for a moment that went on a beat or 2 longer than a simple explanation would require. He told me he would look into it. He told me to document the location and move on. His voice was perfectly even when he said it, and that evenness was its own kind of signal, the way a person who is very practiced at staying calm can accidentally communicate that there is something to be calm about. I documented the location. I moved on. That night in Aguascalientes, I ate dinner alone and read and went to bed at a reasonable hour and had a dream that was not quite a dream. It was a cold morning. I was standing among a crowd of people I didn't know, but I knew them the way you know people you've known your whole life, with the bone-deep familiarity that doesn't require thinking. We were somewhere high up. We were doing something together. Something was being moved. A large stone. I could hear it, the groan and grind of it, shifting under many hands. There was a feeling attached to this that I don't have a clean word for. Not urgency, not ceremony, something in between, something that meant this matters. Keep your attention here. What you do in the next few minutes is real. I woke up and the feeling took about 20 minutes to leave. I lay on my back in the small room and stared at the ceiling and told myself it was altitude and an unfamiliar bed and the particular way an isolated place can get into your sleep. That was a reasonable explanation. I held on to it. Rodrigo found me the next morning before I'd gotten my equipment together. He told me, standing in the site management courtyard with his coffee, that the void was a known feature, a sealed chamber, pre-Columbian, found during a survey in 1994 by a team from a university partnership that no longer existed under the same name. The decision had been made quickly by the survey team in consultation with the ministry to leave it sealed and undisturbed. I asked him why. He said the documentation from that decision was not detailed, which, he acknowledged, was unusual for an official preservation choice about a potentially significant find. You would normally expect pages of reasoning. What they had was closer to a paragraph, and the paragraph did not explain itself well. I asked if the chamber was relevant to the drainage problem I was assessing. He was quiet again for that same extra beat. He said it might be. He said he could get me access for a structural inspection, strictly assessment purposes, if I thought it was necessary. He said it like a man who had already decided it was necessary and didn't love the decision. We went in that afternoon. Access was through a narrow passage branching off the main drainage channel, low enough that I had to bend at the waist for about 6 meters. At the end of the passage, there was a fitted stone block, Inca construction, set into the opening with the same precision you saw in every wall on the site. Rodrigo moved it with a tool he'd brought specifically for this, something that looked homemade and well used. He didn't explain the tool, and I didn't ask. The chamber on the other side was roughly circular and maybe 5 meters across. The ceiling was low, maybe 1.5 meters at the center, so we both stood slightly hunched. The walls were dry stonework, fitted without mortar, the joints so tight I couldn't have gotten a fingernail between the courses. There was nothing inside it, no objects, no surfaces that showed deliberate marking, no evidence of ceremonial use or storage, just a room, a round room underground that someone had taken considerable care to build and then taken equal care to seal. I did my structural assessment. I checked the floor with the probe. I checked the wall faces for moisture. I crouched and measured the ceiling clearance in 3 places. It took about 20 minutes. The floor was intact. The walls were solid. There was no drainage risk. Whatever had been worrying the 1994 team, it wasn't water. The air in there had the quality of air that has not moved in a very long time. You notice that quality more than you'd expect to. There's a stillness to it that goes beyond quiet. I felt slightly wrong the whole time I was inside. Nothing I could name specifically, just the feeling of a body registering something that the thinking part of the brain hasn't caught up to yet. I was glad to come back out into the drainage channel. Rodrigo set the block back into place. He didn't speak on the walk back to the surface. I didn't push it. We both went back to our respective work. That night the dream came back. Same cold morning, same crowd, same sound of stone moving. But further in this time, like someone had started the recording a few minutes later, I was aware of being very high up, wind on my face, and there was a feeling that I have spent a lot of time since then trying to describe accurately, and I'm not sure I can, except to say that it was the feeling of being part of something that required all of you, every bit of attention, every bit of willingness, the way a very difficult and important task requires you. I woke up at 4 a.m, and for a small, clear gap of time, maybe 3 seconds, I did not know my own name. Not in a frightened way, not the panicked blankness of someone waking from a nightmare, just the ordinary, untroubled blankness of reaching for something and finding the shelf empty. And then it was there. Cal Mercer, 41 years old, guest house in Aguas Calientes. 3 more days of work before the flight home. I lay there for a long time before I got up. The altitude does things to your brain. I know this. I had read about it before the trip, and I kept coming back to it over the remaining days of the assignment because it was the explanation that fit the most comfortably. Impaired sleep, altered perception, vivid dreaming, all of it documented, all of it consistent with what I was experiencing. But there was something happening that the altitude explanation didn't quite cover, and I noticed it the way you notice a sound you can't identify, not dramatically, just persistently. My own memories felt slightly different. Not wrong, not missing, just the way a photograph of a place feels different from the place itself, even if the photograph is accurate. I would reach for something specific from my life and find it there, correctly labeled, all the right details attached, but with a faint distance to it that I hadn't been there before, like remembering something I'd read about rather than something I'd lived through. And beside some of those memories, not replacing them, just beside them, there would be something else. Not a full memory, more like the outer edge of one. The feeling of cold air and elevation, the sound of a lot of people breathing together, the weight of something important in the hands. I finished the assessment. I packed my equipment. I took the bus down the mountain and the train back to Cusco and the plane home. I told myself I was tired and that I needed real sleep at real altitude and that everything would settle once I was home. I live alone in a city in Ohio. I have a 2-bedroom apartment where I use the second bedroom for storage and office work. There are a few plants that are hardier than I deserve, given how inconsistently I water them. I have a routine. It suits me. I did my laundry. I called my mother, talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, said goodnight. I wrote up my assessment report and sent it to my firm and invoiced the contract. I ate dinner at home and watched television and went to bed at a normal hour. For about a week, everything was exactly as it should be. Then I was washing dishes on a Tuesday evening and a memory surfaced that had no origin in my life. It was specific the way real memories are specific, not general, not dreamy. A hillside in early morning light. I was part of a group of people working together on something wooden, a structure, though in the memory, I don't stop to look at what it is, because everyone around me already knows what it is, and there is no need to look. The smell of something burning, controlled, purposeful, the feeling of a full community around me, people I had grown up beside, people whose habits and faces I knew the way I knew my own hands. I have never had a community like this in my life. I grew up in a suburb. I work alone. My social life is modest and chosen carefully. The warmth in that memory, the specific texture of belonging it contained, was not something I had experienced. I knew this with certainty, but it felt like mine. That was the thing that made me set down the dish and stand still over the sink for a while. It felt like mine the same way the camping trip with my father felt like mine. The same specific gravity of real experience. The same sense of, I was there. This happened to me. I was not there. It did not happen to me. I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to think about it carefully. I read over the next few days about the documented neurological effects of enclosed underground spaces on memory and perception. There was legitimate science on it. Certain acoustic properties, certain atmospheric conditions could affect the way the brain encoded experience during exposure and for some period afterward. It was not common, but it was real. I found this more interesting than comforting. The memories that didn't belong to me came in slowly and without pattern. I would be driving to a job site and something would surface from that cold mountain morning. A detail, a feeling, the specific sound of wind moving through a crowd of people who are concentrating very hard on something. I would be in line at the grocery store and I would feel, briefly, the weight of stone under my hands. None of it was dramatic, that is worth saying. None of it arrived in a way that interrupted my life or my work. It was more like a radio signal bleeding in from a station that's too close to the one you're actually trying to listen to. Present, persistent, underneath everything. What was more unsettling, and I want to say this carefully because I want to get it right, was what started happening to my actual memories in comparison. They didn't disappear. I was not losing my memory in any clinical sense. I could recall my life accurately, but the ones from the borrowed collection, the mountain, the cold, the crowd, had a richness to them that my own was starting to lack. When I reached for the camping trip with my father, it was there. The lake, the tent, the fish we never caught. But it sat a little flat. It had the shape of a memory without the full weight of one. Like a word you've said so many times, it stopped sounding like a word. And the cold mountain morning sat right beside it, full and present and warm in the specific way that only real experience feels. I called Rodrigo. It took 4 days to get a reply, a phone call rather than an email, which I appreciated. He listened to me describe what had been happening without interrupting. I tried to be precise because I thought precision was what the situation required, and because I was, by that point, genuinely unnerved and precision felt like the only tool I had. When I finished, he was quiet for long enough that I checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. He said that 2 of the 4 people who had gone into the chamber in 1994 had requested reassignment away from the site within 6 months. He said he had never spoken to either of them about it directly and had decided some time ago that he didn't want to. He said he was sorry he had opened the chamber. He said the chamber was sealed for a reason, and that the reason, whatever it was, had not been written down clearly because whoever made that decision had perhaps not found adequate words. He said, before he hung up, that he hoped things settled for me. I called back twice. He didn't answer either time. I woke up on a Tuesday in early December and reached for the camping trip. I could find it. The shape of it was there. I knew there had been a lake, a tent, a father. I knew the approximate age I had been and the approximate year. The container was all there, every label attached, every fact correct. The inside of it was gone, not replaced by nothing, replaced by the mountain, the crowd in the blue hour before sunrise, moving together up towards something. The sound of the site breathing under wind, a feeling of shared knowledge so deep that nobody needed to speak it aloud. I could feel the cold through clothing I have never owned. I could feel altitude in my chest. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, long enough that the light changed. I thought about the chamber, round walls of dry stonework, fitted without mortar, sealed with care, and sealed again after the 1994 survey with the same care, and sealed a third time after my visit with a tool that Rodrigo had brought himself, homemade, well used, suggesting this was not the first time he had needed it. A room that someone built to hold something, filled it up over centuries with every cold morning and every crowd and every moment of shared necessary purpose, and then sealed it because full containers are dangerous to open. I had walked in and spent 20 minutes taking measurements, and I had walked out again, and the seal had gone back into place, and the chamber was still there under the terrace, still holding the bulk of what it held. What had come with me was not the whole of it. I understood that in a way I couldn't explain. What had come with me was the part that fit through the gap. The rest of it stayed. I am not haunted. That is not the right word. And I have thought about the right word often enough to be sure of that. I am not possessed, not watched, not threatened. I am just a man in a kitchen in December who's slowly losing the interior of his own life and gaining, in its place, the interior of someone else's. A life lived in the cold, on a mountain a very long time ago. A life I have no context for and no key to. The trade is not even. I did not agree to it. It continues at whatever pace it decides to continue. I took a job in Louisiana in January, flood mitigation assessment for a historic building in the southern part of the state. I drove there, worked 4 days, drove back. The work was straightforward. I was good at it. I am still good at it. I call my mother on Sundays. She is in her 70s, and she lives alone, and she likes to talk, and I am glad to listen. One Sunday in February, she told me a story about an afternoon when I was 7 years old. A family barbecue at my aunt's house. Apparently, I had done something funny involving a garden hose and a lawn chair, and the family had talked about it for years afterward. She told it the way she had told it for 30 years. Same wording, same pause before the punchline, same laugh at the end. I laughed at the right moment. I told her I remembered. I did not remember. I could see the outline of the afternoon. I knew the aunt, knew the house, knew the approximate shape of the event. But when I reached for the feeling of that afternoon, the feeling of being 7 years old at a family barbecue, I found a hillside, early morning light, wood under my hands, the smell of something burning, people I have known my entire life or someone's entire life moving quietly together through the work of the day. I did not tell my mother. There was nothing useful in telling her. I let her finish the story, and I said it was a good one, and I asked about her week. I have gotten careful over these months about the difference between knowing a thing happened and actually feeling like you were there when it happened. It is a distinction most people move through their entire lives without having to examine. I examine it constantly now, the same way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue, not because it helps, just because the shape of it is always there. There is one I check on more than the others. My father's hands. He has been dead for 9 years. The specific look of his hands, wide across the knuckles, a scar on the left one from a table saw when I was maybe 10. The way he held a coffee cup in both hands when he was thinking. I have held on to this with a care that is almost effortful. The way you hold something near the edge of a surface and keep adjusting your grip. I checked this morning. It's still there. His hands. I can see them. For now, I can still see them.